So we're going to talk today about the consequences of the war. I'm not going to talk about the war itself, although I'm happy if you ask me questions in the Q&A about it, what I think about it, what I think about what was done, what I think could have been done differently. But we'll leave that for the Q&A. The question I think we have today is, what now? What do we do now? It is what it is. And what now in a couple of dimensions, or maybe really 3 dimensions I want to talk about. One is what now for us as individuals? Because I think this war has affected all of us as individuals. It cannot not have affected us. And we'll talk about that. So what now as individuals? What now for the state of Israel? What should Israel strive to do now, given this war and given its outcome? And finally, I think there's a question about kind of what now in terms of the world out there. And here, primarily, I want to talk about antisemitism in Europe, in the United States, really as a global phenomena. And what now in terms of that, and how do we confront that, and how do we deal with that? Even those of us who might not consider ourselves that Jewish, qua Jewish, right? So we'll talk about that. So first, I think it's important to note what this war, I think, represents for each one of us as individuals. Any war, and this war, I think, in particular, really shows us how fragile life is. How easily it is taken away. How easy barbarism can inflict incredible damage on our life and our prosperity and just our ability to thrive in the world out there. Whether it's our own lives, and I don't know how many of you were in Gaza or how many of you might have been affected by what happened on October 7th directly or indirectly by the fact that many of our loved ones were affected by it. I mean, nobody here, I don't think, didn't know somebody who was affected by it, and in many cases, somebody very close. And I think this should raise our consciousness about the fact that life as an individual, the life as a political entity, is fragile. We take it for granted. So many people take it for granted. And if anything, a war like this is an opportunity, if you will, to recommit yourself to living. To recommit yourself to making your life mean something. To do with your life, to give it purpose. To do with your life something of significance. When things are good, when everything's normal, it's very easy to take things for granted. I'll do it next year. I want to achieve that value. I want to achieve that great thing tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now. I want to start a business. I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to go start a business. Yeah, but, there's plenty of time. There's plenty of time. I want to ask her out on a date tomorrow. I think what a war like this and any kind of violent event like this should really enhance in all of us is the idea that life is for living now. There's no tomorrow, there's now. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. Life's too short. I'm getting old, as you can tell from my hair. Way too short. Every second you live, you'll never get back. Your primary moral responsibility in life should be your own happiness, your own success, your own flourishing as a human being, making the most of the time you have on this earth. So, go out there and live. I like to say live with a capital L, because it's not just live, it's live. don't postpone the risk-taking. Don't postpone the new business. Don't postpone the values that you think are important for you, for your happiness, for your prosperity, for your independent individual flourishing. Go for it. Embrace it. And here, look, what objectivism teaches us, what Ayn Rand teaches us really, is the importance of what? What is the way in which we discover how to flourish? What to do with our lives? How to live a better life? How to live the best life that we can? What is the tool that we have to make that possible? ChatGPT. There we go. Not intelligence, artificial intelligence. That's it. So yeah, just ChatGPT what you should do with your life, and I'm sure you'll get a good answer. That's good. I like that. So what? Yeah, I mean, your mind. I think this is a great time. I sometimes say, I like the holiday season in America, Thanksgiving to Christmas, everything slows down. And I like that as a period of time for self-reflection. It's a time to step a little back and say, okay, how am I doing at living, at pursuing my dreams, at pursuing my happiness, at pursuing success in life? How am I doing? Am I flourishing? Is this the best that I can do? Because second best doesn't count. You only have one life. Why would you want to be second in your life? You should be doing what is best for you. Not second best, not third best, best. And it's easy during the year because we're busy with kids and family and a job and a million other things to not focus on that. To just be engaged, to just be living with a small L. It's good to step aside for a period. And I think the end of a war is a good time to do this. To step aside and say, am I living the best life that I can live? Am I doing the best that I can do in this world? And if not, what can I change? What values do I need to embrace? And this is where, reason, thinking, and write it down. Make a list of things you really, people talk about bucket list. You know what a bucket list is? A bucket list is like you get old, even older than me, and you make a list of all the things you want to make sure you do before you die. And then you when you get the diagnosis, you've got a year to live, then you go through the bucket list and you do all the things. I mean, it's pretty dumb. Like, why leave all the things you want to do until you're about to drop dead? We should all have bucket lists. The things we want to do now. The things we want to do over the next 10, 20 years. The things that are must-haves for us to be able to live the best life that we can live as individuals. So, make your bucket lists. Again, these events, whether it's once a year or whether it's end of a war. But again, the end of the war should have given us this really strong sense of this fragility and a recommitment, an opportunity to recommit ourselves to life, to living, to embracing life. So, as individuals, it's a good time. I know many of you have read Ayn Rand. Reread Virtue of Selfishness. Reread a favorite essay. Use that as an opportunity to engage in that kind of thinking. Remind yourself about the importance of your own life, importance of being self-interested and pursuing flourishing, individual flourishing, your life. Particularly in Israel, right? You live in a society, I think, you tell me if Israel's changed, but you live in a society that's pretty collectivist, pretty oriented around sacrifice, and maybe this war has even elevated that discussion and debate. It's easy to get swept away into the collectivism, into the family, into the group, into the tribe, however you want to define it. So step aside. Remind yourself, no, it's about me. It's about my life. It's about my values. And I'm going to commit to them in spite of what family thinks, in spite of what the tribe might think. So a great opportunity for self-reflection, a great opportunity to recommit to self-interested values. And those of you who haven't read Ayn Rand, how many people here haven't read Ayn Rand? All right, so everybody knows you haven't yet? All right. You got work to do. What's that? People have read Ayn Rand. You're safe. All right. Because if not, I was going to do a little spiel on self-interest, but I guess you guys already have the basics, so we're good. What about as a state? I mean, Israel comes out of this war in many ways stronger than it's ever been. It has, basically punished its enemies in ways that they're unlikely, in the near future at least, to come back at Israel in a big way. Hezbollah has been mostly pacified. It'll try to come back. Israel seems to be committed to holding them back. Hezbollah was not wiped out. But Israel's in a much better position vis-a-vis Hezbollah today than before October 7th. If we look at Iran, Syria first, Syria's not a satellite of the Iranians. That's a huge strategic benefit for Israel. There are no Iranian troops on the Israeli border. Not in Syria, not in Lebanon. The Iranians have taken a huge step back strategically in the Middle East. They're a non-player outside of maybe Iraq and Yemen. Whereas before, they were the mighty empire that controlled everything, from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean. Iran itself, of course, has been weakened dramatically. Yeah, it will try to resurrect its nuclear program. But I don't know if you've seen pictures out of Tehran in the last few weeks. Anybody seen pictures out of Tehran in the last few weeks? People playing music, women with no head covering. I mean, something has changed. And some of that was they brought about themselves through the Goals Revolution 3 years ago when they went out the streets and protested and demanded it. But what really tipped it, what really made it so that the Iranian regime will not enforce all these moral codes is the 12-day war, is what Israel, the humiliation. Israel, humiliated Iran. And as a consequence, the regime doesn't have the confidence, the strength to go out into the street and impose its unpopular moral laws. So you're seeing all over Iran people feeling liberated. Liberated, it's going to be very hard for the Iranian regime to go backwards. They might, but it's going to be very difficult. And again, their weakness was laid bare by the Israelis, by this war. So Iran is not a threat anywhere near the kind of threat that it was just recently. Again, Israel's safer vis-a-vis Iran than it was before October 7th. And then Gaza. And look, you can ask me in the Q&A, but I'm not happy about how it's ended in Gaza. But it's a better situation than Israel's had in a very, very long time. It's unlikely, and October 7th couldn't happen tomorrow. It's just an impossibility in terms of the security that exists. And it's likely that this is going to last, the weakening of Hamas and the security kind of a process that Israel is putting in place, that this is going to last for years and years. So the threat that Israel faces today are maybe the weakest they've been, I don't know, since, I think, maybe before Oslo. So since the 90s. Israel is stronger today than it has been maybe since Oslo. Because Oslo was a moment of weakness. We all know what happened right after. Terrorism spike, Second Intifada. It's been a disaster since. Now, it seems weakened to such an extent that Israel has some time. Time to fix fundamental problems. Time to regroup. Time to, again, to rethink, to step back, to realize that this country is, again, life is fragile. This country is fragile. Civilization is fragile. The barbarians are always at the gate. And what that means is Israel needs to do, I think, several things. One, it needs to stay vigilant in terms of security. It needs to stay committed to weakening its enemies, constantly weakening its enemies. The model of what's going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah, it has to export that to Iran. It has to be willing to go bomb Iran every time Iran raises their heads up, tries to build more missiles, redevelop a nuclear program. They need to be willing to take those out. It needs to have that commitment to Gaza. Ceasefire or no ceasefire. If Hamas starts rebuilding, if Hamas starts rearming, Israel needs to be able to go in and destroy it. So there has to be a commitment to security. Now, I'm not expecting what I would want, which is the enemies need to be destroyed. That's asking a lot. If they didn't do it after October 7th, it's doubtful they're going to do it now. But at the very least, the minimum is be vigilant about not letting them raise their heads again. Be vigilant about never putting yourself in a position you were in October 7th, where not only could Hamas do what they did, but you had a northern threat with Hezbollah, you had a threat in Syria, and you had a threat of Iran. So neutralizing all of those is the one thing Israel needs to do. Second, Israel is in a very vulnerable position in terms of its position globally. It is disliked in Europe. That's, I think, what's that? Understatement in some regards. But again, it's disliked by a certain part of society, a certain element within society. And we don't know politically where Europe is going to go as right-wing political parties in Europe rise in power. In the short run, at least, they will be friendly to Israel. I'm not sure in the long run, but in the short run, they're likely to be friendly to Israel. But Israel needs to be able to be more independent than it is. It needs to really think about its supply chains, its weapons supply chains, and its industrial supply chains. It needs to be able to think about its relationship with the United States. I mean, in some senses, the United States is moving more away from Israel than Europe is. Because in Europe, there's a right-wing backlash against the hatred by the left of Israel. In America, the right is becoming anti-Israel, in addition to the left. And generally, if you look at polls of the general population, they're in decline. And yet Israel relies almost entirely on American weapon systems. So Israel has to start thinking about developing not a mercantilist economy that has separated itself from the world, but it needs to build certain, redundancies, alternatives to the existing supply chain. It needs to stockpile weapons that it knows it's going to need. It shouldn't rely on, like in 1973, the Americans sending in the airplanes, or this time, weapon systems having to flow in. It needs to build up as many of those ammunitions, as much of those weapon systems that they know they will need in the future. They need to build them up today. And to do that, I think fundamentally Israel needs to become richer. And we know how to make Israel richer, right? It needs to become freer. It needs to become more capitalist. It needs to embrace the principles of free markets. I think this is an opportunity to go out there and make the case for wealth creation, make the case for liberty and freedom. Israel needs it now more than ever. Now, it's always needed it, and the battle's always existed, and many of us have fought this battle for many, many decades. But maybe the war's created this opportunity. Maybe, again, this fragility, this moment of reflection that the Israeli people are going through is a time to double our efforts to advocate for liberty and freedom. The Israeli economy is far from a free economy, and it's far from its real potential. Israel could be so much richer. All we're seeing is just a little bit of the potential that exists in this country. The bureaucrats, the statists, the mercantilists, the monopolists are choking this economy. And in spite of the stock market going up 6x, I think, something like that over the last 2 years, there is so much more that can be done here. But that means more freedom. And that's something our politicians will resist. And I don't care, who the politician is. As soon as they get into power, they start resisting it because they feel the pressures from the different pressure and interest groups, and they feel the pressure from the people who don't really want it to happen. We'll need a fresh, new generation of politicians, people more committed to these ideas, but thriving towards capitalism, thriving towards liberty, thriving towards free markets is what this country needs. It must have. Now, this is true of every country in the world. But again, Israel's in this unique position where there's this reflection going on. Americans are moving in the opposite direction. Europe is moving in the opposite direction. The world generally is moving away from capitalism, away from freedom, away from liberty. There are a few countries in Europe that might be moving towards freer markets, Poland maybe being one of them. Yes, we had good news today about Argentina. I mean, the only country in the world today that's really moving towards free markets is Argentina, and I assume you heard the news today that Milei won the parliamentary elections, got over 40% of the vote, which means he still doesn't have a majority in parliament, but he will have a big enough minority to block his opposition from overturning his vetoes and from passing legislation he does not support. So this is a huge win. And it allowed Milei to actually do a lot more with his program than he has been able to do so far. So Argentina is probably the only country in the world that's really steadily moving towards liberty, towards freedom. It'll be great if Milei goes all the way, and we can point to Argentina as a great example of how this has all worked and this has been successful. Not that we lack examples in history, but it's always good to have an example right now. So far, everything he's done has worked economically, and I think the potential is unbelievable. And again, the victory today or on Sunday was dramatic. I think it was better than most people expected. So we need free markets. As the world is moving away from them, we should follow Milei in Argentina, which is not anything I ever thought I'd say. Follow Argentina was not. Cry for me, Argentina usually is much more aligned. So, the state of Israel needs what it's always needed. In the aftermath of a war, again, strong. The country is strong, but it's also this opportunity for reflection and change. And we should be demanding that change. Finally, there's the world out there, a world in which antisemitism is dramatically increasing. One of the real consequences of this war is that it has revealed the rot that exists in Western civilization, the rot that exists primarily in Western educational institutions, but it turns out that it goes far beyond just the educational institutions. You know all this. On October 8th already, student groups at Harvard published statements about how horrible Israel was and how wonderful the Palestinians are. October 8th, Israel hadn't done anything yet except die, except suffer. And they already knew who the good guys and the bad guys were, and it was the exact opposite of reality. This was surprising, and yet if you knew what they were teaching at the universities, it wasn't surprising at all. It was completely consistent with what they'd been studying for the last 50, 60, 70 years. It goes back certainly to the 1960s, when the new left in the United States took over the universities and then went on to get PhDs and became professors. But it turns out it's not just in academia and it's not just the left, it's on the right as well. We're seeing figure after figure after figure on the right in Israel, in the United States, expressing anti-Semitic views. We see it in the UK and in Europe, partially because of the Muslim population there, but partially because those countries were always anti-Semitic. And nothing fundamentally, culturally, has changed since those days till today, except that they have a memory of a Holocaust that they feel ashamed of. But other than that, nothing in the fundamental ideas of Europeans, the fundamental philosophy of Europeans has changed. Now, this is difficult for some of us to deal with in a sense that, I'll talk about myself, right? I don't really consider myself a Jew in any meaningful sense. I don't celebrate the Jewish holidays, sorry. I haven't been to synagogue in 40 years or more. I didn't raise my kids Jewish. They were raised as Americans. It doesn't really mean anything to me, other than it's something that, my family was, or is. And yet, other people define me as a Jew. And I think that's what Jews have always found in Europe. As much as they assimilated, the other people chose to single them out as different. Anti-Semitism doesn't ask you if you're a Jew, it tells you you're a Jew. And they come after you whether you self-identify or not. But anti-Semitism is a symptom. It's not a fundamental. It's a system of a rotting culture. It's a system of decline of civilization. It's a system that's a consequence of deep philosophical causes. It's a symptom of collectivism and tribalism. What you're seeing in the United States today is a dramatic rise in tribalism, belonging to a tribe, following the leader, worshiping the leader, and doing what he says. You've seen it on the left, you see it on the right. MAGA is a tribe, the far left is a tribe. They follow the script. They don't accept people who dissent. And the more a country becomes tribal, the more it starts looking out for other people and the tribes that they belong to. And the more likely they are to start putting Jews in their own little tribe. Collectivism, the idea that what matters is not the individual. What matters is not individual freedom, individual happiness, an individual's life. But what matters is the group. What matters is group affiliation. What matters is color of skin, religion, nationality, heritage, where you come from, what your genes are. The individual under collectivism is just something to be sacrificed. It's not an end in itself. It doesn't matter that much. And much of the way the war was framed and is framed in the world is through a collectivistic prism. And much of the response is a collectivistic response. It's about groups and tribes and individuals be damned. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Now, the fight against anti-Semitism is a long-term battle. But to fight it, we have to know what we're fighting for. And the fight against anti-Semitism is the fight against collectivism. It's the fight against tribalism. You're not going to win the fight against anti-Semitism without winning all those fights. And it's not a fight against, it's primarily a fight for. And the fight for is the fight for individualism. The fight for your life, the value of your life, the value of every individual's life. No matter what group they belong to, the individual as an end in himself, as an individual, not as a member of a group. And in that sense, we come back to the first topic, right? In the end, it's all about our lives. To fight against anti-Semitism is to fight against collectivism, which means to fight for individualism. For the idea that civilization should be focused on the individual's value, on the individual's meaning, on the individual's life. And that his group membership should matter not. Where you come from, the collective, the tribe, should not matter to you at all. The focus should be on the individual. So, and that's a big battle that many people are fighting out there in the world, and we're not particularly winning. Obviously, anti-Semitism, collectivism, and tribalism are all on the rise. But that is the fundamental fight. And that's a fight that incorporates what's going on in the Middle East. And it's a fight that we each have to fight in our own soul, because we're all tempted by the collectivists of various forms. So I'll end just with, the war, as I said, is a time for reflection. The end of the war is a time for reflection. It's a time to re-engage and recommit to an individualistic view of the world, to your own value as an individual, to your own life, to living your life, pursuing happiness, pursuing your own flourishing. Thank you. I'll take questions. Yeah. So should we analyze people based on them as individuals or as members of a culture? I mean, you have to take into account, the fact that somebody comes from a particular culture. But look, it's a question of in what context are you evaluating a Palestinian? If you're evaluating a Palestinian as an individual, because you're dealing with them as an individual, then you should evaluate him as such. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there are Palestinians out there in the world who are phenomenal human beings. There's nothing in the Palestinian genetic makeup that makes it impossible for them to choose good values. And if such a human being exists, then you should treat them with the kind of respect you would treat any individual. It's different when you're at war. When the culture and the governing body of a particular people is committed to inflicting violence against you. right? I mean, one of the things I don't like about the war, right, the way the war was defined, was that it was defined a war with Hamas. When the war was really a war with the Palestinian people who lived in Gaza. Hamas was their government. Like, we didn't go to war with the Nazis. We went to war with Germany. You occupied German territory. German people died. Now, because you understand the ideological roots of the cultural decay, once you get rid of the Nazis, the German people can be fine because they'll adopt different ideas. The same is true of the Palestinians. First, you have to get the rot out, which we haven't done yet. But, in a war, you can't interview every individual and figure out what ideas they're committed to and what kind of life they actually want to pursue. But ideally, in life, as we interact with one another, you want to treat people as individuals. And if you meet a Palestinian who lives up to the highest standards, then you treat them like any other human being you would treat. There's nothing in culture that is deterministic. That is, I know lots of people who grew up in horrible cultures and turned out to be amazing human beings. Whether it's the Soviet Union or whether it's, Arab culture.
Well, it just seems like you have a harder time trying to tackle things on the global. I'm not sure how to explain it, but if you want to solve their cultural problem, you have to think about them as a culture, as a group of people, with certain characteristics. If you're judging each one as an individual.
So there's no question that you have to deal with groups. Groups exist, right? Groups are out there. And you have to be able to deal with the group, particularly for, again, in a context of war, in a context of states. But collectivism is not about groups. Collectivism is the idea that you elevate the group above the individual. And the reality is that the way to change Palestinian culture is to elevate the individual above the group. The way to make Palestinian culture better is to make it an individualistic culture. It's to crush their collectivism. The problem with Palestinians is their tribalism and their collectivism. And when Israel is tribal and collectivist as well, it doesn't help. It's not gonna. We have to model, and we have to expect, and the expectation should be that they start treating themselves as individuals and not as members of a tribe and not as members of a collective. And they are collectivists, and you can see the very nature of their collectivism is in the fact that they're willing to sacrifice their civilian population in order to protect Hamas, right? They're willing to sacrifice their own children in order to achieve jihad. There's nothing more collectivistic and more barbaric than being willing to sacrifice your own children and in a war, your own civilian population for the sake of some higher cause. So by their very nature, they're collectivistic, and the way to defeat them is you can only defeat them. The only time Palestinians will change is when they abandon collectivism and embrace individualism. And that's why it's so hard. It's so hard for them to change because these are kind of values that are really, really hard to alter. It's not easy to take a culture and change it in a fundamental sense. You can do it. How was Germany changed? Germany was super collectivistic, super committed to world domination, super committed to killing Jews. And how was it changed? How was Japan changed? Japan in World War II was unbelievably, think about kamikaze fighters. And think about their willingness. Before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States bombed every single city in Japan, firebombed them. Hundreds of thousands of people died, way before the nuclear bombs. And they still went on fighting. Why? Pure collectivism and mindlessness and commitment to an emperor and everything. And how did they change? What is the first step towards change? Let me finish the answer to the question. I thought you were going to give me an answer. The first step is defeating them thoroughly. Is getting them on their knees. So after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese were completely open to new ideas. Because you know what? They had no doubt their previous ideas had failed. After Berlin and Dresden and every city in Germany was flattened, the Germans suddenly were willing to consider that maybe Hitler was wrong. But if we cut a deal with Germany, like if FDR or Truman had said, you know, we've taken France, the Russians have taken Poland, you know, let's cut a deal, let's compromise, let's demilitarize Germany. And maybe we can disarm the Nazis, and we can, you know, what would have happened? Would the Germans have shifted, changed? Well, we did that. When did we do that? When did we do that to Germany? The end of World War I. The end of World War I, they weren't crushed. They weren't defeated. It was a negotiated peace. And what did the Germans think? Next time we'll get them. We just weren't strong enough this time. We'll get them next time. The ideology, the very ideology of German supremacy, the very ideology of German dominance had not been defeated. It was kept alive, and therefore it was resurrected. In Japan, we crushed them. They had nothing after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And their spirit was crushed because they saw these weapons and they said, the Americans are so far ahead of us, nothing we can do will ever get us that far. Something we have done has screwed us up completely. So tell us, and you know who wrote the new constitution for Japan? I mean, General MacArthur and his assistant spent a weekend, and they wrote the constitution. And, you know, it has a phrase in the Japanese constitution has the phrase, right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which no constitution in the world has, not even the American, because it's in the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. And it's in the Japanese Constitution. And they went to the emperor, and they said, sign this. They didn't ask him. They didn't suggest they vote. They said, this is your Constitution, sign it. Now, what does that mean in terms of the Palestinians? I don't know, but we haven't done it yet. It means getting them 100% convinced, with no doubt, that they will never win, that Israel's not going anywhere, and every time they try anything, they will be crushed. Not just defeated, but crushed. Now that means, and I think we had a small window maybe after October 7th to actually do it, but that means being a lot more brutal than we've been to date. And, you know, and then maybe that opens them up and tells them we've been wrong and we need to do something different, we need to do something new, and maybe it opens them up to real cultural change. You know, we can try what they're thinking about doing now is taking over the schools and replacing the curriculum and teaching new material, and maybe that'll do it over the long run. I'm not sure, but maybe it'll do it if they actually implement it. They've never done it in the West Bank. We've never gone in and replaced the schooling and everything like that in the West Bank. But I don't know of any other way. Yeah.
I feel the same situation we have after Germany. It's happening now. I give you an example. The leaders of the SS South went to Arab countries and built curriculum there.
Yep.
So the curriculum was, you cut the head of the dragon, and the dragon went to all these Arab countries and built curriculum, built the expression of the
You mean after the war?
yeah. And because when they opened the dungeon of Assad, they found all this curriculum, Nazi curriculum, same.
Yeah.
So what I feel is happening now, even if you cut the head of the Hamas, what happened is the curriculum is going to spread throughout the world, and they are building all these bases all over the world, and the Nazis into other countries. This is what
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the idea is that after World War II, members of the SS and members of the Nazi Party fled Germany, and many of them went to the Arab world, and they introduced curriculum into the modern world. They, of course, helped them develop weapon systems, and they, in Egypt and elsewhere. And this is now spreading throughout the world. Yeah, through education. I think all of that is true, but I don't. The Arab world has a lot of problems on its head, and some countries in the Arab world have changed their curriculums. I don't think the curriculum is changed to be good. Yeah, I mean, I think.
Mayor of New York. I mean, what I see
Yeah.
is this ideology of Hamas is being spread, and it doesn't spread. They ran out and
Yeah, this is the point about anti-Semitism, that it is spreading and it's going out there. Is the ideology of Hamas spreading in the United States? Not quite an ideology of Hamas. I mean, you've got a lot of these kids yelling, Intifada, globalize the Intifada, and from the river to the sea. It's not a lot of people. It's very few people. Most of the people who yell this stuff don't even know which river and which sea. And once they get a job and have a family, they'll forget about their period of activism when they were young. This is not going to have huge amount of impact. Yeah, you've got Mamdani who's going to win in New York, and it's terrible. It's really bad, but you know what? New York will survive. And when he loses after 4 years, New York will be reborn, as it always is. And America's not going to be seduced by the Mamdanis of the world. What's he winning? He's not winning because of his position on Hamas. He's winning because he's a socialist. And young people in America are upset because rent is high, and they're upset because food prices are high, and they're like, everybody's lied to us, we don't believe in anything, so we're going to try something new. They think it's new. And we're going to vote a socialist in. And what's going to happen? Rents are going to get even higher, food prices are going to get even higher, and they're going to learn, because every generation has to learn anew, it seems, that socialism doesn't work. He's not going to win because he's a radical Muslim. He might be a radical Muslim, but he's not going to win because he's a radical Muslim. He's going to win because he's a socialist. And the radical Islam is a sideshow. It's not that important for the people of New York. What's important to them is cost of living and things like that, is the economics.
A lot of people on the right in Israel, I think, they think that enlightenment individualism is what got us into this mess. Like the secular Zionists brought us Oslo and all these concessions and stuff, and it's actually a return to the Jewish identity that can solve this. So can you speak about how what you're offering is different and will bring better results than what the secularists of the past in Israel have brought?
Yeah, I mean, this is a claim being made by the right all over the world. It's not unique to Israel because, if you look at the right in the United States, you look at the right in Europe, basically what they're saying is the problem in the West is too much secularism and too much enlightenment. Reason leads us towards not just Oslo, but towards woke. Reason leads to woke. They see that connection. After all, Marx was a man of reason, they claim, and they make that connection. And that's now a theme on the right. We want to abandon the Enlightenment. We want to elevate religion, because religion is the only way we can combat the left, which is the ultimate enemy. So I'm writing a book about this. The book's going to be called Christianity, something like, because you never know what the title of the book is going to be until the publisher has a say. But it's going to be something like Christianity versus the West, where I'm going to make the case that Christianity and Judaism, and certainly Islam, but any religion, is the antithesis of Western civilization. It's the antagonist to, because they make the argument Western civilization was built by Christians. Western civilization was built by Christianity. Israel was built on a basis of religion. And that's just untrue. I mean, the people who built this country were primarily secularists. The whole Zionist project, at least in its origin, was a secular project. The fact that many of those secular Jews became leftists is a problem of collectivism. It's not a problem of being secular. Secularism doesn't necessarily lead to the left. So the modern world is a product of the secular Enlightenment. It's a product of reason, science, the idea of individual rights, which is a secular idea, the idea of individual liberty and individual freedom that created America, and ultimately, to some extent, made it possible for this country to exist, for Israel to exist. You're not going to save a project like Israel by appealing to mysticism, by appealing to something that doesn't exist, by rejecting the one means by which human beings survive, which is reason. You're not going to save anything by abandoning reason. Now, in what way is what I'm suggesting different than what most secularists hold? Most of the secular left, all of the secular left, is fundamentally collectivist. It's just that their collectives, might be different than the collectivistics of the right, but they're all collectivists. They all don't value the individual. They value the group. The whole woke project is a project of collectivism. It's about identity politics, which means the color of your skin, your ethnic background, the group you belong to, and how oppressed it is. I'm offering the alternative is a solution based on individuals using their mind to live their life free. Individuals using their mind to live their life free. And the role of government being the protection of those individuals from violence, from theft, the protection of their rights. What are rights? Rights are the freedoms to act based on your reason, to act in pursuit of your rational values. That's what rights are, the freedom to act. Freedom means the absence of coercion. Nobody can force you. That is a vision that never really has existed in Israel, certainly not politically. It's very different, and the role of government, which is the only role of government, is to protect your rights, would suggest a very different approach to Israel's security than the approach of Oslo or the approach of the traditional Israeli left. I don't know how much of the left is left in Israel, but the traditional left that wants to compromise and sell out and not protect the individual rights of Israelis. So its security becomes almost the only thing government does. Well, as a group, right? Collectivism is different than recognizing the existence of group. Collectivism, again, is the suppression of the individual, the sacrifice of the individual for the group, for the collective, for the group. The fact that a country exists and the fact that there's a political entity, a unit that is a country, its sole responsibility as a political entity, as a political grouping, is to protect the individual rights of the individuals. And it does so in an individualistic way. So, I'm against a military draft, even in Israel. I still think you shouldn't have a draft in Israel. All right, you had your hand up earlier, and then I'll go to this side. דבר בעברית, יותר קל לך בעברית. So the question is Japan and Germany really good examples and for how we should deal with the Palestinians, given that the Palestinian culture is a lot more primitive than the culture, certainly of Germany and maybe even of Japan. I think human beings are human beings. You're not going to be, and nobody is in a position in which they cannot learn. Nobody is in a position where they cannot improve. I don't think the Palestinians are genetically or culturally predestined to never have, I don't know, a liberal view of politics. I think they've taken a certain path. They've made certain choices that have led them to where they are today. I don't think that was an inevitable path. It's the only path they could have taken. And some of the blame for them taking that path is Israel's. Most of it is the Palestinians. So can they rethink that path and make different choices? Yes. Just like individuals, we can do that. Groups are just collections of individuals. Every individual so if you can get a significant number of individuals within a group to rethink the path that they're on, they can change. There's no reason they cannot. So I think the example is applicable. Now you're going to have to apply it differently, right? You're not going to drop an atomic bomb. So you're going to have to figure out how to do it. It's going to be different than how it was done in Germany and Japan. But the principle of crushing them in such a way that they realize that they cannot win and will never win, and that is opening up their minds, I think that principle holds. And there are examples way before Germany and Japan, there are examples in history where that was necessary in order to really, I mean, look, wars at the end are never ended by peace treaties. Wars end when one side wins, unequivocally. If you look at all of human history, that's how wars end. And the war with the Palestinians needs to end by one side winning. Let's hope it's the Israeli side. Right, yeah. All right, so two questions. One is, I mean, they're related. One is, what does it mean to fight anti-Semitism with individualism? And the second is, how do I view people who on reserve duty, you know, or went to fight during this war, and spent months, almost 2 years on the battlefield, leaving their careers, in some cases their families, in order to do that. So let me do the second first. I think one of the, it's a really healthy phenomena when people love themselves, the people around them, their family, so much that they're willing to go and fight for them. When they realize that their life and their family's life is in danger. One of the things about being an individualist, one of the things about being, I think, somebody who takes their lives really, really seriously, is you don't want other people to do the fighting for you. You want to fight for the values, the things that are important to you. When your life, when your family, when the people important to you are at risk, you're going to go and handle that. So I admire the people who volunteered. I admire the people who went. I hate the system of a draft, of forcing people in. I always say, and I said this about Israel, a political entity, a country, whose people will not volunteer to defend it against a real enemy doesn't deserve to exist. Right? If you don't have enough people who are willing to go and fight for you, you don't deserve to exist. And I think Israel showed through a lot of these people volunteering that people in this country are willing to fight for their values, are willing to volunteer. So I wish Israel would shift to a professional army of volunteers and make that transition. It doesn't mean a smaller army, it just means an army of volunteers versus an army of people who are forced to participate. So I think it's completely consistent. People always say, if you're an egoist, if you're selfish, right, why would you ever go fight? No, I go fight because I am selfish. I value my life so much, I'm willing to put on a uniform and a gun and go fight for my freedom. I don't want to fight for some stranger's freedom. I'm not going to go overseas and go fight for somebody else. But if it's my freedom, if it's my family, it's my kids, of course I'm going to fight. It would be unselfish. It would be anti my interests not to fight. So I consider that a self-interested, egoistic thing to do. even when they don't, right? Because we've all been raised with big collectivistic ideologies. Anti-Semitism, look, the only way anti-Semitism goes away is not by showing people how wonderful Israel is. It's not by showing how many Nobel Prizes the Jews have won. Everybody knows that, and they resent the fact that they've won so many prizes. And they hate Israel. They don't hate Israel because we're bloodthirsty maniacs. They hate Israel because we're successful. This is a successful country of successful people. I mean, you drive through Tel Aviv, and all those skyscrapers, that's what they hate. And they hate, and building on anti-Semitism in Europe, they hate that it's Jews who are successful. So it's success that they resent. It's... They do. Of course they hate themselves. I mean, Europeans are masters of self-hatred. They're filled with guilt. It's part of what drives them. Americans on the left particularly, they hate America. They resent America. America was built on genocide. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, what's her name, Tlaib, the American congresswoman, Rashid Tlaib, who just went on a whole thing about how America's built on genocide and built on slavery, and this country wouldn't exist without those things, and America's a rotten place. That's the left. The left is exactly self-hatred. So you're not going to defeat them by showing how nice we are. They don't care. The whole idea of anti-Semitism is not based on facts. And you're not going to change their mind based on facts. I mean, this idea that Israel lost the PR war. I don't think Israel lost the PR war. It's that people are conditioned to hate Israel because of a particular educational system in America, a particular approach to education that exists in America. And unless you're willing to challenge that, then you're not going to change people's minds. The problem, so to combat anti-Semitism, you have to go to the source. And the source is identity politics, the idea of categorizing people within groups and based on their ethnic background. That's un-American. Right? The whole idea in America is to evaluate people as individuals. So if we can teach people to stop thinking in terms of groups, if we can teach people to stop thinking in terms of collectives, and that the individual doesn't matter, if we can teach people to think more about their own life and worry less about other people's lives, then I think anti-Semitism goes away from the world. As long as we're stuck in this group politics and group identity and group morality, sacrifice of the individual to the group, then, the Jews who are successful, they're relatively rich in America, they've done very, very well, that's why they're hated. It's intersectionality is what they teach at university. And you know intersectionality? It's you take all the characteristics a human being has, and you look at them from the perspective of whether that characteristics makes them an oppressor or oppressed. So if you're white, you're an oppressor. But if you're gay, you're oppressed. So a white gay person gets a certain, in a sense, intersectionality. But if you're black and gay, then you're oppressed on two things. So now, the more oppression points you get, the more virtuous you are, the more moral you are, the more good you are. If you're poor, that's a sign that you're good. This is altruism in action. Altruism is the idea that you should live for others, and their need is a claim against you. Take communism, right? Communism for each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So need is the standard. Oppression is the standard. So, I tell this, this historical fact, right? 1967, before 1967, Europe loved the Jews. They loved Israel. Why did they love Israel? Because there was a bunch of weak, pathetic, Holocaust-surviving Jews building a country in the middle of nowhere. They were going to fail, and they loved them because they were weak and they were poor. And then there was the Six-Day War. And what did Europe do in the Six-Day War? I mean, people forget this. They flipped on Israel. They became super anti-Israel. France put an arms embargo. Britain, they wouldn't sell weapons, right? Before 1967, Israel got no weapons from the United States. Post-67, America flipped, opposite of Europe. And why did Europe flip? Because now those poor, pathetic Jews turned out to be strong and capable and able. Well, we don't like that. And then they looked around and said, who's poor and pathetic and miserable? Oh, the Palestinians. We'll support them. And in 67, Europe flipped from supporting Israel to supporting the Palestinians. And this is altruism. This is exactly this intersectionality. This is the idea whoever's suffering more deserves more of our support. And that's what happened. Yeah, we'll take this and then I'll come back to this side. Yep.
Don't you think Israel loses some of its legitimacy when it allows the settlers in the West Bank to attack Palestinian farmers or their villages? And second question, where do you think Israel can draw enough resources and will to turn Israel from a service economy, which is what it fundamentally is, to a manufacturing economy? I think the U.S. can recover because they have some remnants of the industrial base they once had. Israel doesn't have any of that.
So, what was the first one. So the first question was, doesn't Israel lose some of its legitimacy because of what the settlers do in the West Bank when they burn down villages and they attack Palestinians? And the answer is absolutely. I mean, anytime Israel does not practice the rule of law, anytime they let people use violence and intimidation, and it doesn't matter against whom, Israel as a legitimate state, Israel as a moral state, loses credit, loses points. You know, in the big picture, again, you have to compare it to lots of other cultures and lots of other countries, and it still does pretty well. But yeah, I mean, every time I see images like that, it's a horrible situation, and it's bad for Israel. It's wrong. It's immoral, and Israel loses points in terms of a good country anytime that happens. So that should be condemned, and good people in Israel should fight against that and make sure that the law is applied equally towards anybody, and nobody should be able to take the law into their own hands. Again, self-defense is self-defense, but if these things are not self-defense, then they should not be allowed, and the people who do them or perpetrate them should go to jail for a very long time. The second question was, service economy. I don't buy this whole service economy BS. There's nothing wrong with the service economy, and there's nothing particularly good about manufacturing. I think the worst thing that can happen in the United States, I think the worst thing economically that can happen in the United States is for it to become, quote, a manufacturing economy. Why don't we all become farming economies? That's even better. We should go back and all become farmers, because 200 years ago, 95% of the population were farmers. So we should strive to go back to farming, which means strive to go back to being poor.
Stop subsidizing the textile manufacturing and get into Jordan and Afghanistan and whoever.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, good. I mean, you can survive without clothes if there's an embargo. I mean, again, you need to figure out what's strategic and what you can't survive without. But you don't need the manufacturing. Manufacturing is not an end in itself. The reality is, in America, I don't know about Israel. In America, manufactures more stuff today than it ever has. I know nobody tells you this, but if you look at graphs of manufacturing, it manufactures more stuff with fewer people. Well, good. The whole idea of bringing manufacturing back to America is ridiculous and stupid. Maybe it shouldn't be in China, but it should be in Mexico and Canada and Vietnam and Argentina and who knows else. There's absolutely no reason the United States should make textiles. I mean, that would be bizarre if you brought back textiles to the United States. So there's no value in switching the Israeli economy. The question is, are there certain strategic things that you need to do? Can you figure out how to, what in America is called friendshore, that is, make sure that the stuff that you really, really need, your friends are making, are you sure that your friends, even at a time of war, and that you can get it? And then make sure the strategic stuff is made here. But no, I would not try to get rid, one of the great things about Israel is the service economy. You know what service jobs are? Programming. All the tech, all the tech in Israel is service. Do you want to get rid of that? No, we want more of that, right? So we don't need manufacturing to replace that.
I guess manufacturing economy is the reduce the amount of needed jobs,
Yeah.
reduce stuff, but Israel doesn't produce a lot.
But it doesn't need to produce a lot. Why does it need to produce a lot? Again, it produces ideas, which are the most powerful thing in the world, right? That's what matters, and that's what they get paid a lot for, the ideas and the innovations. Right, yep. You asked already, right? He didn't.
תודה רבה על ההרצאה המרתקת. שתי שאלות קצרות. מה לדעתך התפקיד של מדינות ערב, במיוחד מדינות המפרץ, בפתרון לבעיה הפלסטינית? ושאלה שנייה, רודולף, אם אתה בחרת את השם של ההרצאה, אבל למה המלחמה שלכם? למה לא השלום שלכם?
Yes. So first question is, what role will the Gulf states and other Arab states play in solving the Palestinian problem? And second is, why the war after the war, not the peace after the war? The first part is, I think they're going to play quite a big role. I think the money is going to come from them. I think, if there's a change in Gaza, then it'll be brought about some degree. Some of the curriculum that they're going to use might be from the Gulf states, because they have reformed their curriculum over the last 10 years to make it less anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. But in the long run, I don't trust the Gulf states. I don't think anybody should trust the Gulf states. I mean, I don't trust kings. I've never trusted kings. The whole beauty of America is they rejected kings and they overthrew them and they went on. I don't trust anybody who, who exploits their own people the way they do, has little regard, I think, for individual rights. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, if you're an atheist and you express your views on the internet, you'll go to jail for many, many, many years. It's a fact. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust a culture that has that. So yeah, they're better than the Palestinians. It's not a very high benchmark to go. But these are not models of societies of freedom-loving, individual-loving, capitalism-loving, individual rights-loving places at all. They're the opposite of that. I won't go to Dubai. I won't visit it. I won't go to Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm in a position where I've said things about Muslims and about the Arab world, so I'm afraid to go. But I just don't want to say, there was a conference in Abu Dhabi recently. I said, I'm not going to a country that treats its own women the way they treat their own women. I don't want to sanction that kind of behavior. So I don't trust them. They're going to play a role. It'll be positive in the short run. In the long run, who knows? The thing about a king is, what if somebody kills SMB tomorrow in Saudi Arabia and one of his cousins takes the throne? Do we know what his cousin thinks about Israel or anything else? Has he aligned all the cousins? Are all of them on the same page? We know it's not the case. The thing about kingdoms is it relies on one man. And when that man flips, so do the ideas, so does the culture, so does everything else. And again, haven't we in Western civilization come to the conclusion kings are bad? And we shouldn't have rule by kings? Why are we so celebratory of the fact? Now, look, Israel should sign peace agreements with these countries, again, as long as we watch them and are careful and monitor what's going on, because Israel needs the relations, but I wouldn't trust them. All right, who hasn't asked? Yep.
My question is about the theory of objectivism.
Yep.
What it does to the modern family. You encourage children to only do what's best for them, what's right for them. Doesn't that bring, with time, estrangement among generations and detachment? You just don't like something that your parent did, you discard them.
Okay, so what does objectivism do, in a sense, to the family? Because you're teaching young people to be egoistic, to be self-interested, and what happens then is they often will, or it gives them permission, in a sense, to lose touch with their family and to ignore the family, particularly if the family has done something that offends them or they don't like. So first of all, I don't put family as the top value, as something I need to preserve. What I want to preserve is the life of the individual. And to the extent that family contributes to the life of the individual, which I believe it can and does, then family is a good thing. And young people who really understand these ideas will figure out that family provides them with some value, depending how nice the family is and how good the family is, more or less, and they will keep connection with that family to the extent that it provides them a value. Now, I have a lot of respect for my parents, not because they share my philosophy, not because I agree with them on a lot of things, but because they raised me. They invested a lot of time and effort in that. They did a pretty good job. They didn't do anything horrible to me. We share a certain history and values. But am I as close to my parents as a lot of other people who might not have my values? My sisters, my brother? No, I'm not. I'm not as close to them. So, I mean, my life is, I think, better, just as good. I don't place that as the primary. That is, family has to be taken into the context of your life. How important is it? How much value you get from it? How much it contributes to you? How much you value the shared history and everything that's come before? It's not an end in itself. We've been trained to think that family is everything, but I don't think family is everything. Family is important, but it's not everything. It has to be placed within the context. And then there are parents who are horrible. Nobody here, I know, but there are parents who are horrible.
Not talking about this.
Yeah, but look, a lot of kids will rebel against their parents and then find them later on in life because they'll realize that they're missing something, and that's fine. But I don't think it's objectivism is what alienates kids from their parents. I mean, kids have been alienated from their parents since the beginning of time. And I know families that have nothing to do with objectivism where there's alienation. I think in the opposite, what objectivism teaches you is to value, is to figure out how important something is to you. And if your parents or your family is really important to you, then you'll keep in touch. And if it turns out that it isn't, then it isn't. All right, who hasn't asked? You haven't asked. Yep.
I have an argument and a question.
Argument and a question.
So my argument is, I argue that it's collectivism, specifically Jewish collectivism, that can drive the young man to sacrifice his life to protect the country. My question is the logical conclusion of the individualism theory that you presented that Israel should not be a Jewish state, we should abandon nationalism?
Yeah, so two questions, two comments. Comment and a question. The comment is that it's in particular Jewish nationalism that drives young people to go and volunteer for the army and fight. And so is my individualism, is the argument that under an individualistic world, Israel should not be a Jewish state and should not exist, right? Exist as secular. Yeah, so I don't think Israel should be a Jewish state. I think Israel should be a state for Jews. I think it's an important distinction. I do believe 100% separation of church and state, or synagogue and state, or religion and state. So Israel should be a state for Jews. And I think Israel's unique as a state for Jews because Israel is a country that's built on a foundation of self-defense. Anti-Semitism is unique in the world. It just is. People hate us. We haven't done anything to them, but they hate us, right? Quite the contrary, we've done a lot of good to them, and they hate us. And Jews realized very early on, again, whether they consider themselves Jews or not, they are hated. And they had to bond together in order to defend themselves. You can't do that as an individual. You can't fight a battle against the world as an individual. You have to come together to form a political entity to do the fighting. That's the role of Israel. Israel's job is to protect itself. Now, in an ideal world, in a world where there's no anti-Semitism, in a world where collectivism is dead and gone and everybody's an individualist, would Israel exist? Probably not. I mean, it would exist as a political entity, but would it exist as a special place for Jews? It wouldn't matter. Jews would be welcome anyway. So it's not an ideal. It's a reality. We live in a particular reality. In this reality, Israel has to exist. Now, I think you're right that in Israel today, a lot of people go fight for collectivistic reasons. I think that's true in America. People go fight for collectivistic reasons. I think that's true in most countries. I don't think that's necessary. Again, I'm an idealist. I'm talking about my ideal. I think in an ideal, with the right education system, with the right way of people thinking about their values, people want to fight for their values. And part of that fighting for your values is if you live in a particular place, if you've chosen to live in a particular place, is to go fight for that place. All right, let's make these the last two questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. First one is, why is the fixation specifically on...
Why what?
Why is the fixation
Fixation.
specifically on Israel? Because there are so many other conflicts.
Yep.
Some of them much longer.
Yep.
Why specifically Israel? And the second question, you talk a lot about knowing how to name your enemies. You talk a lot about Islamism. Why so hard specifically with Islam? I mean, in the Cold War, nobody said, everyone knew the enemy is communism.
Yep.
And in the World War, people knew it's
Yep.
Nazism.
Yep.
Why specifically with Islamism it's hard?
Yeah, good question. All right, so let's start with the first one, which was, give me a word. Fixation. Why the fixation? Okay, so why the fixation in Israel when there are much bigger, more important, more bloody conflicts in the world? I think the fixation in Israel is because it's Jews. I think it's anti-Semitism. And it's successful. It's the combination of being Jews and successful that makes Israel particular. Why doesn't nobody care about Sudan or Somalia? Because it's poor people killing poor people, and they don't know how to categorize that, right? They're both oppressed, and they're both killing each other. There are no good guys and bad guys. They don't fit in the model. Now, Israel, Palestinians, that's easy. Rich, successful Jews versus poor and weak Palestinians. Well, obvious. These are the bad guys. These are the good guys. So it fits in the model perfectly. It fits in the altruistic model. So the problem in other conflicts is you don't have that categorization easily. Syrian civil war. Why did nobody care about Syrian civil war? It's Arabs killing Arabs. They're all poor. They're all primitive, if you will. They're all backwards. They're all poor. So doesn't fit. So you have to think about how they think in terms of their categories. Their categories are oppressed, weak, strong, Jew, not Jew. And Syria, no Jews involved. All sides are weak. That's it. And therefore they have no opinion about it. So, they take this stuff seriously. In a sense, they take morality seriously. That's their morality, they claim. Right? It's a perverse, horrible morality, but that's how they think in these terms. And this is why it's very hard to defeat it by going there and say, oh, come to Israel, see how wonderful it is. Look at the skyscrapers. Look how much technology we develop. That's why they hate us, because we do all those things. Right? What was the second question? Just give me a word. Islamism. So why is Islamism so difficult? Why is it so difficult to convince people that Islamism is the challenge? That's an ideology that is an enemy. People accepted Nazism, they accepted communism. Why won't they accept Islamism? I think there are two reasons for it. One is because it's affiliated with a religion. Religion has special status, particularly on the right. So George Bush would never blame Islam for 9/11. because he's a religionist. If he blamed religion for 9/11, wait a minute, religion, force, violence, maybe that's true of other religions too. Maybe it's not unique to Islam. So he was very apologetic about Islam. You remember, Islam is a religion of peace. They celebrated the Ramadan a month after 9/11 in the White House. There was a Ramadan celebration. So he was super apologetic about Islam. And then the battle was against Afghanistan and war on terrorism. You know, the abstraction of terrorism. And they went to Iraq for some bizarre reason. Nobody knows why, right? So they avoid the accusation that religion could drive such behavior. Religion is peace. That's what we're taught. So the West is very sensitive about this stuff. And particularly if you think about the West, because Europe, you know, the bloodiest war in all of European history is not the First World War, and it's not the Second World War. It's a 30-year war. The 30-year war, which you probably haven't heard that much about, lasted 30 years, obviously. It was between Protestants and Catholics in the early 17th century, in which more than a third of the population of Germany was killed. More than a third. So it's the bloodiest war in terms of percentage of the population who died, right? They slaughtered each other, they raped, they pillaged. October 7th on a massive scale. A systematic violence between the two. Catholics and Protestants killing each other over religion. So Europeans and the West generally is very sensitive about naming a religion as an enemy because of kind of that history and that heritage. You know, they did it with the Crusades. And those were very bloody affairs. And you know, they're not proud of them, and you know, they shouldn't be. You know who they killed first? In the Crusades, when they went after the Crusades to capture Jerusalem, right? They left northern Germany. They were rounding up, and they were getting ready to go all the way to the Middle East, and they wanted to get you know, warm up, do some fighting, do some killing, kind of as a warm-up. Who did they kill? They killed the Jews. So they slaughtered the Jews of Germany on the way to Palestine, to kill the Muslims in Palestine. So, but you read the stories about what they did to the Jews in northern Germany, the Crusade, the First and Second Crusade. It's just horrific, right? Again, October 7th, you know, redone. So, yeah, but then, you know, and the Pope was against it. So the Pope, to his credit, if you can give credit to the Pope, the Pope was against killing the Jews, but the preachers on the ground of the Crusade, they thought this was a great idea, and we might as well get. I mean, we could go into a whole discussion about the history of anti-Semitism and its Christian roots, and why there's so much anti-Semitism in Christianity. But you know, if somebody asks me, I'll go into that. But it's interesting. So that's reason number one. So that's one. Reason number two is Western guilt. So Islam, again, is Muslim countries generally are poor, oppressed, and who are they oppressed by? Well, the West, the colonialists, who you know, the West divvied up all these countries after World War I, and we destroyed the Ottoman Empire, and we exploited them. And we feel guilty about the Arab world and the Muslim world, and therefore to name Islamism when it's really our fault that they got to this position, that would be you know, we don't want to name it in those terms. Yeah, there's some crazies on the fringe, but you know, and to the extent that they're crazies, it's our fault because we radicalized them by colonizing them when we did 300 years ago, whenever, 200 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah. Last question. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the socialists are very caring. This is why they kill so many of their own people. And they're very caring. This is why they make themselves poor, right? Yeah. Yeah. This is what they hear.
What I'm trying to ask is, when you're promoting philosophy of individualism, how can you also at the same time sell it, given this human trait that we do want to connect to other people and we want to care for one another?
I mean, I don't know that there is such a. I mean, there's a trait there. There's something there. There's a sense in which we're a social animal, but it's not that we want to care for other people and we want to take care of them, or it's not that we want to care for anybody. We want to care for certain people, and that's what the focus needs to be on. That is, there's immense value in other people. Other people are incredibly valuable to the individual. I couldn't survive without millions of people doing all kinds of jobs all over the world. Let me finish. At that level, right? At the level just of material existence, I couldn't survive. But more than that, there is immense value in friendship. There's immense value in love. There's immense value in, having a group of people around you you trust and you can communicate with, and you can be visible with, and you can really, embrace. That's the kind of human connection that's healthy. I think what a lot of people are looking for is an unhealthy form of human connection. A human connection that is dependency-based, where people are dependent on one another rather than independent and act as traders, where people leech off of each other, where people expect other people to help them out whether they deserve the help or not. People want unconditional love. Well, let me tell you something. There's no such thing, or shouldn't be, something like unconditional love. Love is conditional.
I don't think that's what people actually want. I think people want to feel like connection is valuable, and yeah, they do want to feel like they live in a world where people care about one another.
Well, I think an individualistic country is a country that cares much more about one another than a collectivistic country. I tell you, when I moved from Israel to the United States, I had better relationships with people because I chose who to have the relationship with. Whereas in Israel, everybody's your name, everybody feels like they're all part of the same collective. They all feel like they're all your friends and your cousins, and they have a business in your business, and they have the right to interfere and the right to say into your life. Whereas in America, you don't get that. So I don't know. Look, people want all kinds of things. Some of them healthy and some of them not. What you need to focus in on the healthy stuff. You want connection? There's nothing that connects you more than as an individual with other people who are individuals, who you can respect, admire, and really have a connection with. Friendships are stronger when people are individuals, strong individuals, than people are just are connected just by group affiliation.
I mean, I may agree with you practically, but I think when people hear you,
So,
we're fighting for separation
I-
for individualism,
yeah.
that's what they hear.
I agree with you. So you have to make the case that they're not hearing it right. That is, individualism is not about living on a desert island. Individualism is not about separating yourself from society. Individualism is not about not having friends.
So how does objectivism emphasize the social aspects of human beings?
It emphasizes the fact that we both spiritually and materially must trade with other people.
Well, but I mean, you only reach that point after you explain what you don't agree with.
Look, objectivism is a very, very hard philosophy to communicate because everything in the world out there is antagonistic to it. Their premise, everything that they think when they hear terms from objectivism is antagonistic to it. So individualism doesn't mean isolation. It's obvious that it doesn't mean isolation if you understand what selfishness doesn't mean exploiting other people. But every time you use that term, they hear this, and your job is to, patiently explain that what individualism means is living for yourself, which means the need to have human connections with other people, but healthy human connections with other people. Connections of friendship, connections of valuing, connections of trade.
I guess last point is, I think one of the reasons why objectivism
There really isn't, because once they realize what the content of that term will be, whatever the term, gobbledygook, call it woofyism or whatever you want to call it, as soon as they understand what's the content of it, they will have the same sentiment. But, you know, she's right. We need to do a better job communicating, you know, what objectivism means in terms of the day-to-day life of people, and why it does not mean isolation and not caring about other people and living on a desert island. Now, I think that if you read Ayn Rand's books, it should be pretty clear that it doesn't mean that. Our book forms lots of friendships around. So does, I'm not going to say anything about Atlas Shrugged because the people here haven't finished it, so I don't want to spoil it. But there's nothing in those books that talks about people being isolated. Quite the contrary. I mean, people criticize Dagny for maybe getting together with too many men. So it's, it's a joke, inside joke. Yeah, I mean, I actually think the novels do that. I think that's why the novels are so powerful, because they do that. They present it through characters who are actually living. And I know people choose to read Howard Roark as not caring about anybody else and being isolated and so on. But think of his relationship with Mallory, the sculptor. You know, think of his relationship with the bricklayer. I forget, Mike. I think his name's Mike, the bricklayer. Think of the relationships he forms, a little community, if you will, he forms around him. But people don't see that because they're so focused on how obnoxious he is because he's sticking to his principles, and they don't like that. And they turn that into he's isolated. He doesn't want relationship with other people. Well, that's not in the book, and it's not in her life. I mean, she had constantly a group of people around her. They even called it the commune. What's that? The collective. They even called it the collective as a joke. You know, none of us live in isolation. And the best way to do it is to model it, to live your life. Thank you.